and welcome back to the Sports Talk podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the Jadeveon Clowney situation and the JuJu Smith-Schuster one. So to start off, we're going to talk about Jadeveon Clowney, why he hasn't been signed yet by anybody in free agency, and the reasons for that, and who might be the favorite to get him, and who's the most interested for Jadeveon. So Jadeveon Clowney was one of the top free agents in the 2020 class, you could say, of free agents. He's a very good football player that produces at a high level. The only problem is that he doesn't produce at that high level every single week. He's a very inconsistent player. At the beginning of free agency, he thought he was worth around $20 million, which was very short-lived after he had no interest from anybody. So then he dropped his market value price to about 17, $18 million. The reason I think Jadeveon Clowney is not worth 20 million or even 17 or 18 million dollars is that he's injury prone. He's had injuries almost every season. Last year, the year before that, he doesn't have the flashy stats. He's never had a season with double digit sacks, so 10 plus or 10 sacks. He's a very good run stopping defensive end, but he doesn't have the stats. I personally think he is a very good player. I just think that the injuries have has hurt him so much. The injuries, the lack of production hurts him. He's just not a defensive end that's worth $20 million. Jadeveon Clowney can play almost everywhere on the line. He could not on the line, but he could line up as a outside linebacker, as a defensive end, and he's more than just a sack getter or a sacker. He plays the run phenomenal. He contains phenomenally. He just doesn't have the stats. Like last year, he had 3 sacks. A player with 3 sacks is not going to get $20 million. It's tough to say because I think he's a very good football player, but 3 sacks last season, never having a double digit sack season in his career, is not a player worth $20 million. And he's just very inconsistent. And when you have inconsistency, you're injury prone, and you don't have double digit sacks in your career, you're not going to get $20 million in the NFL. And here are the reasons I think why Clowney hasn't found a team yet. First, the injuries, and the coronavirus, the COVID-19 is a big reason because teams are not allowed to bring him into their facilities and test him and see how he's doing physically. So that has a big impact on a player that is known for his injuries to not go to facilities and teams and show them that he's in top shape and that he's not injured. The high asking price of Clowney, of what he wants, 17, 18, 19, 20, whatever you want it to be, that is a lot for him right now. I think he could be worth that money, just right now that is way too much. He had a below average season last year in stats, like it was not good. He had a few games where he was flashy, like the game against the Eagles in the playoffs, he was good. The game against the 49ers in San Fran, in the overtime game, he was had a very good game. Both 49ers games actually played very well. But besides that, he just had an average really below average season with the Seahawks. And very little teams right now, as we're speaking on in May, have the cap space for a player that wants $20 million like Clowney. You've just passed the draft where you paid all your draft picks. You passed the mostly free agency where you've paid your players. Now you don't have that cap space for a player like $20 million. It's too much for teams right now. He could be a very versatile player when he plays at the level of the first overall pick when we saw him with the Texans or even with games with the Seahawks. He could be a difference maker in the game. He could play a lot of outside linebacker, defensive end. He has the speed, he has the strength. It's just that the inconsistency is there, and it's a big what if. He's a big what if. Now, to continue, I think that there are teams that should sign Clowney and that will benefit from signing Clowney. The first team that could benefit from signing Jadeveon Clowney are the Eagles. The Eagles have been interested in Clowney since the beginning of free agency. They've just been interested in a defensive end. They were in the beginning interested in Yannick Ngakoue from the Jaguars, but then he got franchise tagged and now just wants to get traded, but the Jaguars asking price is way too high. It's a first round pick and some. And now Jadeveon Clowney is talent at the defensive end that is just there in free agency, and I don't see why the Eagles would not try to give him a 14, 15, 16 million dollar deal, 1 year deal. It would benefit the Eagles a lot because that's one of their weaknesses is their defensive end. They have Barnett and Graham, who are, I think, two very underrated defensive ends in the NFL. It's just that Barnett has always had injury problems like Clowney. So who would you rather, Barnett or Clowney? And they need depth at that position. They have the cap space for Jadeveon Clowney, one of the few teams that have the cap space. And like I said, there are question marks at the defensive end position for the Eagles. The defense for the Eagles is a question mark. I think their offense, they drafted a receiver in Jalen Reagor, who I think is a pretty good receiver, but the defense has a lot of question marks. I think their secondary has question marks. Last year they got torched. Yes, injuries hurt their secondary, but I think with a player like Clowney, it could add that sense of you double team one guy and it could free up Barnett or Graham on the other side. And Clowney it brings another capable, highly capable defensive end that could bring some rush, that can bring sacks, that can stop the run. He's just a very good player that can help a good team. Second team that should sign Jadeveon Clowney are the Tennessee Titans. The Tennessee Titans, as the Eagles, were linked to him early on, but the Tennessee Titans have been linked to Jadeveon Clowney the most in this free agency campaign. They have the cap space for Jadeveon Clowney, and they lost their best edge rusher to the trade in a trade to Denver. So they are looking for defensive end help. They're looking for defensive line help. They did sign Vic Beasley in free agency, so that is another very inconsistent player that could be good, but right now is not playing at his full potential. And they have the rookie Simmons that they drafted last year, who had an okay year, but right now that's their only two defensive ends, Beasley and Simmons. So they need depth. They need a better defensive end than Simmons and Beasley. I don't know about you, but I would not be satisfied with just Beasley and I wouldn't be satisfied with Beasley and Simmons as my only defensive ends. I think Jadeveon Clowney, out of all these teams that I think should sign him, the Titans would be the ones that would benefit the most out of this, because the Titans are already a very good team. They have a very good offense that is based on the run game. Their defense is very good. You add a player like Jadeveon Clowney, and they've just gotten very, very, very good. Another team that I think should sign Jadeveon Clowney, or in this case, re-sign Jadeveon Clowney, are the Seattle Seahawks. They are the most familiar with Clowney, so they know what they're gonna get. They know how they're gonna get it, and they know when they're gonna get it. He could be good with the Seattle Seahawks because he's already had a season with them, another season with the same game plan, with the same coaches. It just makes the player more familiar with the playbook, and he'll just get even better with the Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks already know how good Jadeveon Clowney can be in the games that he played amazingly in. They know what he can be. They know how he can change a game and how much of a game changer he can be. And I think with another season with the Seattle Seahawks, if it's 1, 2, or 3 seasons, the sack numbers will go up. It's a matter of time before they go up. He is a very talented player. He's not going to stick with 3 sacks every season. They're going to go up for sure. No question about it. According to multiple reports, it seems like the Seattle Seahawks have moved on from Clowney and have moved on from contract talks with Clowney. Do I think they're done with him? No, but according to a lot of people think that Jadeveon Clowney will not be a Seattle Seahawks because they've moved on from him. Because another reason why you could say they moved on from him is that they drafted 2 edge rushers in the draft in the second and the fifth round. So I think they're looking forward to life without, or a season without, Jadeveon Clowney. Finally, a team that I think could be a dark horse in the Jadeveon Clowney signing could be the New York Jets. The New York Jets have a lot of cap space, and their defense is just missing a defensive end to be a very good defensive line. So I don't think a lot of people think the Jets will go after Clowney, but I would not be surprised. As I say, they're my dark horse pick to sign Jadeveon Clowney. So to conclude the Jadeveon Clowney talk, my prediction is that he signs a 1-year, $16 million deal with the Tennessee Titans. I also think that his production will go up. I don't know if he'll get injured or not. I'm not a psychic. But I do think his production will go up with the Tennessee Titans just because of the amount of talent he has around that defense and the amount of talent the Tennessee Titans have in that defense. So I just think it's a good fit for both the Tennessee Titans and Jadeveon Clowney on a 1-year kind of prove-it deal. Yes, he's getting $16 million, but there is a price to pay because he is a talented player. You just have to see, will he stay consistent and will he not have any injuries this season? And I think if everything goes right, I think Jadeveon Clowney could look to make a much more lucrative and longer deal after this year if he has a good. So now that we're done with the Jadeveon Clowney talk for this podcast, we're going to go to the next situation that I would like to take a look at, which is the JuJu Smith-Schuster one. In multiple reports from The Athletic and many different other news outlets that the Steelers are not likely to resign JuJu Smith-Schuster or pick up his option after this year. I think that this is crazy. I think that the Steelers should pick up and should re-sign JuJu Smith-Schuster just because of the talent he has. Yes, he had a bad season in 2009. Yes, part of it was his fault, but I don't think it was all his fault. When you go from playing with Big Ben for 2 seasons, and then you go in one season you have 3 quarterbacks, your production is for sure going to take a drop. Especially if these quarterbacks, Mason Rudolph is not a very good quarterback. I don't even think he sucks, Mason Rudolph. Hodges doesn't have an arm. He can't throw the ball. They're just barely game managers that he played with, and of course he's going to have a bad season. It's normal. But I do see the Steelers organization's point of view. They were counting on him to be that receiver number 1 to help those backup quarterbacks like every good receiver would do. They were counting on him to be their wide receiver 1 in 2019, and he did not live up to that hype or that name of wide receiver 1. 2019 campaign was absolutely brutal. He was injured and only played 12 games in the season. He only caught 42 balls for 552 yards and only had 3 touchdowns. This season probably scared the Steelers to front office and made them second guess their thoughts of re-signing JuJu Smith-Schuster or of picking up his option for the following year after this one. And I don't blame them. When you want a receiver to be your receiver number 1, you want them to produce, you want them to get more than 500 yards receiving, and you want them to get more than 3 touchdowns. No matter the quarterback you're with, your receiver 1 is supposed to produce for you, supposed to get open, and JuJu Smith-Schuster just struggled to do that last year. And talking about JuJu Smith-Schuster, I think that there are many positives and negatives that go with him. He has the size, he's a competitor, he has the speed, the vision, and he tracks the ball tremendously. But he does struggle against cornerback 1s, the top cornerback on that team, like we saw in 2019. When he was matched up against the top cornerback on the other team, he lacked the ability to get open compared to 2 years ago when he was wide receiver 2 because of Antonio Brown, where he would have great seasons as the receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Reasons maybe for the lack of production and the lack of production basically he had last season could be Big Ben getting hurt. I think that is a huge loss the Pittsburgh Steelers got. I think besides their defense, their offense was not very good. Doesn't help that they lost James Conner too for a good part of the season. But JuJu Smith-Schuster was there to be that receiver 1 and to be that target that the Steelers needed. And Big Ben or not, he should have produced and should have been better last year. Another reason why is Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown, maybe you guys forgot, was the best receiver in the NFL when he was playing and not crazy. And Antonio Brown would get the top cornerbacks on the other team and maybe even the safeties. He would get double teamed Antonio Brown. They would double team Antonio Brown. The other team, JuJu Smith-Schuster would be open. He would just have to beat the cornerback, the second cornerback or the third cornerback. He'd be open. He'd catch the ball. I do think Antonio Brown was one of the main reasons why JuJu Smith-Schuster balled out in his two first seasons. And I do think that without Antonio Brown, it hurt JuJu Smith-Schuster. And as we saw in his production and in last year, we saw how much it hurt him. He did not produce as a wide receiver 1. He produced as a wide receiver 2 or 3. Final reason is injuries. He had injuries last season. It started in week 1 where he had, I think, a toe injury or something like that. So he just had injuries. He was dealing with injuries. He could have been playing with injuries. He missed 4 games, could have missed more, but he still played. I like JuJu Smith-Schuster, and I still think the Steelers could still consider signing JuJu, but I would wait to see how he does next year with Big Ben in 2020. Is that production going to go up? Is Big Ben the reason why, or the lack of quarterbacks, the reason why JuJu had such a bad season? It could be. I personally think that's it. I think with Mason Rudolph and Hodges, you're not gonna have 1,000 yards. I'm sorry. It's like saying. But if JuJu Smith-Schuster does not produce and has the same type of season he did last year that he with Big Ben, then I don't see the Steelers using him or trying to resign him, and I see them letting him walk. Do I think that's a good idea? No, I personally think they should re-sign him. I think he is talented, but it also comes with a price. Does JuJu Smith-Schuster want to get paid like a top receiver in the league? Does he want to get paid $15-16 million? If that's the case, you let him walk because he's not worth that. And he showed to you that he's not worth that with last year. And if he has a bad season this year or an average season, you're not going to pay him like a franchise receiver. You're going to pay him like a receiver 2, receiver or a below average receiver 1 or a receiver 2, which is like 8, 9, 10, $11 million. And I think if that's the asking price, I don't see why not the Steelers wouldn't sign him, because I think that's a good deal for both sides. You get a very talented receiver that has not produced, who I think can produce in upcoming seasons. And for the Steelers, you save some cap space by not going to overpay a receiver. And I could see this going like not as much as the Antonio Brown thing, but the Steelers did not want to pay Antonio Brown the money he was worth. So I don't see why the Steelers would pay JuJu Smith-Schuster the money that he wants. It might not even be the money he's worth, the money he wants. If he wants to be paid like the big receivers, I don't see the Steelers paying him because they didn't want to pay Antonio Brown. Yes, Antonio Brown had off-field issues. He was crazy and whatever, but still, the Steelers have not been big on paying receivers, and I don't think that will change unless JuJu Smith-Schuster's production changes immensely. My final take on the JuJu Smith-Schuster situation is that he was a bust in his third season compared to his first 2 seasons, and I think if he can come back to the way he was playing in his first 2 seasons, I think the Steelers should re-sign him, and I think the Steelers will re-sign him. It's just that the Steelers are scared that the third season is the seasons that they're gonna get in upcoming ones, and I hope that's not the case because I like JuJu Smith-Schuster as a player. But I think all will work out, and I think next season JuJu Smith-Schuster will be a 1,000-yard receiver with 8, 9, 10 touchdowns, and I think he'll get the money he deserves. I don't think it will be 15, 16. I think it will be 11, 12, 13 million dollars a year, and I think that's a good deal for both teams. So, thank you very much for listening to another podcast, another sports podcast. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you next Thursday.